but I'll mention that. So hello everybody and welcome to this webinar. My name is Michael Waugh and I'm the ANZ Product Manager here at Central Innovation. As always, if you have any ideas for our next topic, please shoot them through to us in the question box. And if you have any questions, I'll answer them at the end. And if I don't get to you, given our time constraints, and today's webinar will be a little bit longer because we're going through the upgrade training, we'll log a technical support ticket on your behalf and get back to you through that. Don't forget to register and check out all the content, including this webinar and the file that I'll be using today on myci.centralinnovation.com. If you're new to the site, you can set up your password by clicking here. There's a little video which shows you how to use the site. And if you have any issues registering or logging in, please just click this link to email our site administrator to let us know. Don't forget, through the MyCI portal, you can get the CI tools, formerly the Academy-ish tools, for Australian users and New Zealand users as well. And we also log support tickets and respond to support tickets through this portal. You can also log a support ticket by emailing us directly. Doing so creates a support ticket automatically in our system. Support AEC Australia at centralinnovation.com.au if you're in Australia, or if you're in New Zealand, nz.support@centralinnovation.com. You'll get an email response from us, which you can reply to. Just be sure not to change the subject line. That's how our system knows where to send the response to. Coming up, we have the upgrade training season, which will be held in CI offices, New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, West Australia, Vic, Auckland, Christchurch, and we'll also do a few in places outside of those offices. We expect this to run for about 3 hours, and we'll include things which won't be mentioned today. For example, information on the CI tools, how to use them, what's coming up in the CI Essential Library. We'll have a look at the Twinmotion Archicad Direct Link, and we'll have a few little examples to play around with there. There's also a global CI Tools webinar coming up to launch the new and improved versions of these tools. The date, time, and the duration are still being worked out. And same for the Twinmotion Link webinar, which were popular requests in our last webinar on pens. We've also started Archicafe. So you'll find us in remote locations where the coffee's good, and I'm more than open to your suggestions here. The idea is that we'll head out and you can meet us, the technical team that is. Bring your file along, bring any questions you have, and ask us some things about Archicad. So, we're here to talk about the upgrade training for Archicad 23, and principally we're going to keep this to a narrow focus and try and keep this webinar to about an hour or a little over an hour, maybe a little over an hour. Don't forget to also check out the template guides for Australia and New Zealand. They're also up on MyCI. So let's get started. And when you download this file, just open it up. It's a template file, so you can't actually overwrite it. And we've got a little view map here. And just underneath the audit folder, you'll see the views that we'll be working through today. So when it comes time for you to practice any of this stuff, or if you want to revisit any of the things mentioned, you can just double click on a view to take you to the relevant slide. So the first topic we're going to talk about today is migration to Archicad 23 from version 22. Then we'll have a new features overview, keeping the topics to beams and columns, openings, and then hidden gems. So the first topic we're going to talk about is migration. And typically when we open up an older file, like Archicad 22, in Archicad 23, we'll be presented with a migration assistant. Now, in most cases, we'll click Migrate Archicad Libraries, but let's see what would happen if you clicked Skip Library Migration. Sometimes, Archicad will actually pull in the Archicad 22 library if it's an Archicad 22 file. So that's something to be mindful of, because if the new libraries aren't loaded, you'll have missing parts in the new tools. For example, here's an opening tool, and we're trying to have a look for different opening symbols. And we can see that there's nothing here available to select. So that's something, again, just to keep in mind. Check your libraries. Also, because we're running the Archicad 23 and we're using the Archicad 22 library, we're able to keep our Archicad 22 surfaces intact here. But that means that we can't use the Archicad 23 surfaces, which are much improved. They look really gorgeous. So what happens if we try and fix all this and we add in the Archicad 23 library using the library manager? And if you want a refresher on that, the library management webinar we did earlier in the year is also available on my CI. Well, keeping just the Archicad 23 library and no migration libraries, we'll end up with our racing flags. Going back into the library manager and clicking Migrate Libraries down the bottom here, brings us back to normal. The Archicad openings, doors and windows, for example, they will be migrated from the version 22 path to version 23 now. And the migration library also includes the surfaces from older versions of Archicad as well. So we'll have to go through and do a surface migration. So you select your old surface in the catalog, click New, and then instead of creating a brand new surface or duplicating it, we'll just replace the settings from catalog and select the most relevant surface. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on because we've done our best to make it as easy as possible, and we've come up with some workflows around this. When you're migrating a template, your company template, from an older version to a newer version, especially recently where there have been vast improvements in the senior render engines from version to version, be sure to open up the scenes in Archicad 23 using the Australian template and export all the photorealistic scenes just to your desktop. So we've clicked up here to open up the photo rendering settings dialog. Then you select this little pull down menu and click on select and manage scenes. Click on photorealistic scenes and then click export. Then open up your own template. Follow the same steps to get to here, but rather than clicking export, click import and import everything. I should probably mention that you want to delete the contents here beforehand. The reason is though that these photorealistic scenes, they stay with your original template. And so if you're working in a template that you started in version 18, chances are these scenes are still from version 18 and they're not using or taking advantage of all the improvements available in the Cine Render engine. So again, it's just something to be mindful of there. There have been a few small changes in the Aussie library. And you might notice, though, as a result of these, you'll get double ups. So what we have here in blue is the door marker. And then in black, we have a new leaf marker, which is appearing at the same time. This is part of a new library part, which is available for hinged doors. And you'll find this in the tags and labeling page. So we can actually add the leaf width opening here by ticking this box. We can add ID and we can add some custom text to here. And we can toggle whether or not we see these bits of information by model view option. The same model view option that controls whether or not we see door markers here in model view option. We'll turn this on, but it'll also turn on the original markers that we were using earlier. And we'll see by default they're turned on for your favorites as well. So we just have to do a bit of a cleanup. When it comes to your favorites, you can open up the favorites palette by clicking the little star icon, finding your hinge doors. And if we have two hinge doors side by side, like a double door, both leaves will be labeled as well. That's actually a pretty cool little feature of this new library part. And then right click on all those selected favorites, find the dimension marker tab, and then click no marker. Might also find that some of your favorites might be missing a preview. That might happen because the markers have changed a little bit, and your favorites might be using a marker that Archicad simply can't find. Now, if you migrated your library parts, you would have the migration library, and this wouldn't be too much of an issue. But if you wanted to clean up your library and get rid of that migration library, all you have to do is just open up those favorites. Again, select all the window favorites that are affected, right-click, edit, and then select the dimension marker tab. And then where it says missing, click here and select the dimension marker that you want to use. Just a quick note before we get going on Mac OS. Recently, Mac OS 10.15 Catalina was released. Now, there have been some pretty big changes with Catalina, and Apple have limited what software can and can't be installed. Archicad 23 will be compatible, and Archicad 22 will be compatible with updates, and BIM Cloud will also be compatible with updates. But Archicad 21 and older will not be made compatible with this future version of Mac OS. So if you are running Archicad 21 and you have a Mac, please don't upgrade to Catalina. Okay, we'll now start talking about beams and columns, which is the first two tools that we'll talk about. And then the two new tools in Archicad 23. Beams and columns are often complex elements, and the simplest way to model them is really just to break them down. So we begin to think of them in parts. As such, Graphisoft have implemented a new workflow to design such elements using this hierarchical structure approach. At the element level, we have a beam, and if I have a beam in our model, I just click it. It's a beam. But if we bring up its settings, it's now modeled in parts. Using this philosophy, we can create really complex geometries in what's really a simple and intuitive workflow. We're utilizing things that we're already familiar with, like edit mode from the stair tool, the curtain wall tool, the railing tool, to select sub-elements and make adjustments as if they were normal things in Archicad. You can see the little black hotspots and the profile modifier lines here. We're breaking things down into segments so that we can start building up complex geometries by creating little parts. We can now change the angle of end cuts. We can now vertically curve beams. And there have been extra features added here to the pet palette. So in some instances, it's enhancing workflows, and others, it's just adding extra functionality to already existing modeling tipped parts. And I think what we achieve here is a certain level of modeling freedom. In Archicad 22, the interface was similar to, say, the roof tool, the wall tool. We were talking about geometry here at the top. And then we'll talk about profile offset modifiers if that was used. Below that, floor plan and section, model overrides, and then classification and properties at the bottom. To supplement the new developments in Archicad 23, the interface for the beam and column tool has become more similar to the other hierarchical tools, such as the railing tool, the stair tool, and the curtain wall tool. So gone is that major tab interface, and now we're using this section here on the left-hand side to edit, for example, the column here as a whole. But then we can go deeper and edit the sub-elements of it, or the segments. We can change how it appears in floor plan section, and then here we've got the beam information and so on. So we've now got a few examples that we'll work through. And the first one is a prefab concrete structure. Here's our model. It's just an overview of the structure, and the light grey areas are the ones that are already complete, and the dark grey areas are the ones that we'll be editing for those of you who will be watching this video again at home with the file in front of you. We'll be making some changes to these dark grey ones so that they are going to look the same as the lighter coloured ones. And our first task is to make this column here look like this column here. So let's have a look at how we can use the new interface to achieve this. I've selected the column and I'm going to bring up its settings by clicking on the settings button up here, or Control T or Command T on your Mac. And we have our new interface. I'm going to go down to the segment button here. And at the moment, I've just got one segment. So the first thing we need to do is activate this button here called multi-segmented. And this will allow me to add extra segments into the column. Here, we can set the column to be a certain percentage of the total length, or we can just specify a fixed length. And for this piece of the column, I'm going to specify a fixed length of 8,500. You won't really see much of a change here. But let's add in another piece. So I'll click Add. And this piece is also going to be fixed with a length of 200. And I'll click Add again. So I've got 3 pieces now. The third piece will be 400. And then add again to get our fourth and final piece. And this is going to be 200. And you can see I can isolate one of these pieces, these segments, by clicking on it here. And I can make some changes. So let's just click OK here and see what we've got. And when I click on this column, we can see we've got these new join marks here. That represents each segment. And if I highlight this one as well, we can see the same join marks are there, but the geometry is different. So let's now have a look at what we can do from a geometry perspective at a basic level to get this column to look like this column. So I'm going to highlight this column here and bring up its settings again. And the long length here, that doesn't need to change. is our shorter length. Okay, and we need to put a taper on this. So in this part of the dialog, we can either keep the cross sections top and bottom a uniform size, or I can specify different cross sections for the top and the bottom using the tapered method. Here with the pull-out, we've got the ability to enter these different dimensions here, and I just need to unlink this guy here, and we'll change this top value to be 800. And we can see the change immediately here in this dialog. Let's come back to this middle section here. And again, we're going to make some changes to the geometry here. We'll need to unlink the two. And I'm going to change the top one from 400 to 800. Now, that's all the changes that I need to make. So when I've made those, I can click OK. And we can see the result. So we've just introduced the idea of breaking a column down into segments, clicking each segment and changing the geometry. And we've introduced this new idea of tapering. Let's have a look at the footing now. And this is a column. And what we're going to try and do is match this column to one of these. So I'm going to select them both and actually isolate them in 3D. You can see that there's a bit of a difference here. So the first thing we'll do is bring up the settings of this footing. And I'm going to select the top segment. And now we can use complex profiles in the segment. Before, a complex profile was just applied to the column as a whole. But at a segment level, we can use complex profiles now. So click on Custom, and I'm going to choose the prefab column footing. And then click OK. And we can see here that we've now got the base column and a complex profile being used. Let's bring up its settings again, because we need to take this one step further. You can see here that the top section has got tapered edges. So let's go about implementing this into the column segment that we are working on. I need to select the top segment, and we'll change the top from a regular geometry to a tapered size. And I'm just going to change the top to 1000 mils, keeping this linked. Click OK. And now the cross-section size at the top has changed. Let's just go quickly into edit mode and show you how this works. You can right-click on that element and bring up the complex profile that we're extruding in the Z-axis using the complex profile part in the column tool. And we can see that we've got these normal stretch modifiers on the outside. These are what we'd expect. And there's actually some offset modifiers in the middle that are currently set to 400. So let's close this. And if I moved across the info bar at the top here, here's our profile offset modifiers. And I can change from the concrete base to the complex profile part. And perhaps specify this to be a little bit smaller, like so. You can see that one changing. And we've now finished off that little exercise. Let's have a deeper look into this edit mode, and we'll take the example of this beam here, and we're going to make it look more like this beam. So first step is to just click on the beam itself and then click on the little edit symbol that pops up. In this edit mode, as you saw previously with the footing, I can select the individual segments of this beam. And thanks to profile modifiers that were introduced last year, we can start to offset these parts. So maybe in this first instance, we'll just offset that lower section of the beam. Then I'll switch to the middle section and offset this up, like so. And now we need to get the tapered angle here to make this look nice. So I'll select the geometry. And we need to come up here to the info bar where it says cross-section size and change this to tapered. And now, while in edit mode, I can achieve a taper graphically. Now these are complex profiles, so I can sample and inject parts. So bring that one up. Naturally, if you hit escape by accident, you'll actually exit edit mode. Look what happens though, and this is always funny. If I sample this tapered segment and inject it, the taper goes the other way, which is lovely. So let's just go back to our little mouse tool, arrow tool, and I can just reverse that taper. You can hit escape on your keyboard or just hit the exit edit mode button, and you can see we've now achieved that. So in this next scene, we're going to have a look at this beam, and we want to make it more like this one. If I click this one, a telltale sign that I need to actually insert a break in the middle is this little join. But if I click here and just click on the reference line itself and then click add new node, that actually creates two new beams. So there's a new option here called split segment. And that will allow me to insert a segment into the beam. And I can just use the cursor to reference the midpoint of our neighboring beam. Okay, now we'll go into edit mode and we'll work on the tapering. So you can click on the left-hand side first, change it to be tapered, and then we'll click on this little reference line here, profile modifier line, and I can stretch it down. And I just hit escape quickly on the keyboard to deselect. Same here. And away we go. Let's now have a look at some more complicated structures, some steel structures. And we'll start to learn a little bit more about joints. And pet pallet editing. So here's our beam here. It's made up of parts. A lot of the work's already been done. And what we're going to do is make it look more like this. So just like normal beams, I can click on the reference line and then just add an angle to the beam's incline. Like so. But have a look at what happens here. This join has split the beam. Or the beam's been split at that join, I should say. And so to here, we've lost connection there. So let's have a look at some of the things that we can do to fix this up. So if I click on this beam and bring up its settings at a segment level, we'll find the joins here. And I want to make sure that the joins are 90 degrees. But 90 degrees to what? So we'll just make sure that both 90 degrees. It's 90 degrees to the reference line. So if I click here, I can actually change the join angle as well from the pet pallet. And just undo that. Let's just bring up that beam setting again. And let's say I want to clean up this part here. But there's no join down here. So now we need to move back up to the beam because we're editing the entire beam. This is the start of the beam. That's the end. We're not trying to change something in the middle at the segment level. And I can make the start and the end vertical just by clicking here in the bottom left-hand corner. That's also an option available to us from the pet pallet. Swing that around graphically. It's this command here. And what we'll do now is click on the column here and we'll just swing this one around. So that's a nice neat finish. Select them both and mirror a copy. Let's have a look at some portal frames now. So here's an example of a portal frame, and we haven't done any cleaning up yet. If I click on this column here, just going to use pet pallet. The snap guide will lock at 90 degrees. And that's that one. Okay, and we know from a pet pallet point of view that I can change this edge here to be vertical, or we can do the same in the dialog box, the settings dialog. Okay, we'll do a little edit here to neaten up that connection. Now we need to do two things. You can see I've got a steel plate here for reinforcing, but it's actually on an angle, and I can use the pet pallet here to kind of lock it to 90 degrees. You can do it like this. Naturally, we could also have done that through the segment by selecting the joins and making sure that this is 90 degrees to the reference line. What about this guy here? How do I clean up that joint? So at this point, I'm going to open up the little questions dialog and let's see if anyone can tell me how I might connect this part here to this part here. Okay. I've got a couple of answers so far. All right, I think everyone's getting it. This is great. Yep, we need to add a taper, and the best way to do that is through edit mode. So back in Archicad, click edit mode, and we will add a taper. Oh, I think I clicked on the wrong one here. And we're just going to, the taper's already added. I'm just going to use that little stretch. There we go. All right, let's have a look at the glue lamp structures. So here's a really good example of building up segments part by part to create a high level of detail. So you can see almost what's possible. And in previous versions of Archicad, we could curve the beam in a horizontal plane. Now in Archicad 23, we can curve the beam vertically. And I'm just going to do so, and then click on the morph line that we've got. But I've still got a little bit of a problem here. Can everyone see that this part here is vertical, and so is this part here? Again, I'll open up the floor to question. How can I fix this? Getting a few answers through. I think, again, everyone's really understanding it. We're going to go into beam settings, and because this is the end of the beams, I'm just going to click on the top level, and we need to adjust the end cuts here, so 90 degrees. And again, it's 90 degrees to what? It's 90 degrees to the reference line here. Even though the reference line's curved, we can figure out the normal direction, a point that's 90 degrees from the curve at that point. And if we just take off graphic overrides, this is the column I was talking about earlier. And if I just zoom in, you can see that each one of these is modeled, and the little nuts and bolts are all little profile modifiers. From an informational standpoint, here's a pretty complex structure. And as we've discussed, we have the element level, which can contain properties and a classification, and it's either going to be a beam or a column. And then at the sub-element level, we can also have properties and classifications, which are valid only for this particular part or that particular part. And the correct classification for these parts is a member. The correct classification for the whole thing is either a beam or a column. The beauty of this is that you can actually start to schedule these. And so, using properties, we could figure out the weight or the length of these elements, count as well. And if it's a tapered section, you might also want to start thinking about the dimensions of each end. Another thing that's improved is how we can represent these beams and columns in our drawing. Let's start talking about beams and floor plan display. In Archicad 22, there was quite a disparity between floor plan representations of columns and beams. We can see what was available to us here on the right-hand side for beams. There's a lot more ticks than there are for columns. So now in Archicad 23, we can see all these little green boxes, which are added components for floor plan display. We also have a new part here called projection mode. So let's have a look at this. In Archicad 22, we could do projected with overhead. Now in Archicad 23, we can have a combination of projected and symbolic views. So let's have a look at how that looks with a hybrid floor plan presentation. It's called projection mode. And we want the uncut to be projected and the overhead to be symbolic. So I'll click that, which gives us the extra level of detail and also a better representation of where the beam would finish on the floor plan. We can have projected below and above the cut line. Like so. And what I like about this is that it gives me a sense of confidence that what I'm showing on floor plan is more accurate now. How about a situation like this, where you might have beams above each other? Representing these on floor plan before is a little bit tricky because in Archicad 22 it looked like this. Now in Archicad 23 we have cover fills for beams and columns, and this has been on the wish list for quite some time, so I think there's a lot of people out here that will be very happy about this. To activate cover fills for our beams in this instance, we're just going to select these beams, bring up those settings, and in the floor plan display, I'm going to tick the box for cover fills. And there we are. Much clearer documentation. Coming back to a structure as complicated as this. let's have a look at how we can now implement some of these changes along with what we had before to really clear up our documentation. So we can see that we can represent the overhead secondary beams with just a single axis line. We've got the main structural elements here in bold with a cover fill. We can show our footings below with a dashed line. And we can show our primary structural beams here with a axis line and an outline. In Archicad 23, there have also been some new changes to the model view options for beams and columns. And there's a new option here called hidden line under a slab. So imagine a structure like this. We can see there's beams that sit underneath slabs, and we've got columns as well. So previously, the floor plan presentation would look something like this. This was quite confusing. It's pretty hard to tell what's going on here. With this new model view option, our documentation is again a lot clearer and it's automatic. Look what happens if I pull back a slab or I push it out. The dashed line happens automatically. The hidden line that it's using, the dashed line, is coming from this option here. So if you don't like the dashes, you can change them. Just a quick note on interoperability. Here's our Archicad beam, and it's exported as an IFC beam. And the IFC beam has parts in it with their own classifications, IFC members. So for those of us interested in IFC, each part has its own classification, and that's retained. Now we have just some examples on what's now possible with the beam and column tool. I think some of this is pretty impressive. Again, just using segments and a bit of imagination. And then once these parts are made, just save them as favorites. Here's a lovely historic column. And I think previously to get this level of geometry, we would have had to resort to GDL or morphs. And even with morphs, it would be very hard. So now we can get through our beams and columns. The third tool we're going to have a look at today is called openings. And what is an opening? Well, there are two types. It's either a void, which is a complete penetration of the structure, or a niche, which is a partial penetration. And this tool is actually quite important for the work we do as architects and designers. So why openings? Well, openings are relevant for every discipline, whether you're an architect or a structural engineer or a services engineer. You're going to use openings eventually in a BIM workflow. As an architect, for example, we could also use openings to create niches, reveals, or slab set downs, for example. We would call these architectural openings. And then naturally, we would create voids for doors and windows or services shafts or stairwalls or lift shafts, which penetrate structure, and they are called engineering openings. From the structural engineer's standpoint, they need to know the exact locations where other disciplines need to penetrate their structural elements. And then it's also relevant for an MEP or services engineer because they will request clearances around some of their pipework or ductwork. Openings are generally exchanged many times during an open BIM workflow, and naturally they have to be documented. So that leads on to our project goals. The project goals that were set out were that it had to be a modeling element. They needed to be we need to enable the architect to quickly and accurately model openings and document them in our own 2D views. And we needed a link symbol to represent them in the drawings. We're also managing some of the information around them. For example, where they are, how big they are, what type of opening are they, a niche or void. We need to be able to preserve a round-trip workflow with third-party software via IFC. And the tool also needed to be teamwork compatible. I think one of the main achievements here is that Archicad now supports a provision for void workflow, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Let's start with some examples around modeling. And it's important to understand the opening tool is essentially just extruded geometry that has a basic shape and works like a linear extrusion throughout the building elements that it cuts. The base shape can be rectangular or circular, and I believe that a polygonal opening is coming up a little bit later on. This tool allows us to place openings into most Archicad elements and also cut between them. So, for example, we can cut a wall with an opening and also a slab with the same opening. So let's move on to an exercise now. We'll just start with the basics here. Here's our wall. I'm going to click on the opening tool. And we're just going to place a simple void using the favorite. Now that that's placed, I'm going to hit escape on the keyboard and zoom in, and we can see that the opening has cut all the skins here. Let's now place an opening and attach it to multiple elements. So just place it in the middle here. And when I click on this opening, we've got that familiar little button here. So let's cut extra elements by clicking the plus button. And I can then click on the wall in front and all attach. Click the plus button again and it'll attach to the wall behind. Sometimes in Archicad, it's required to model walls as individual leaves, and this allows us to model some of the more granular details quite easily. Also, in Germany, for instance, for interoperability reasons, they model like this a lot. And it allows us to break walls down into trades. And I know that there are clients out there who do this for NetSpec purposes as well. So just like before, we're going to place the opening in the outermost leaf. And you can see that this is only just cut through this outer leaf. And I'm going to continue to attach to multiple elements. Like so. When I click on this opening, we can see that the reference line is on the outermost leaf, and we've got an anchor point. So much like a window, an opening has an anchor point, and if I select the anchor point to be the top left-hand corner, you can see that that opening, or that anchor point, is now up here, represented by the blue line. And then if I change the size of the opening will stretch from that point. When we click on the, let's call it connections button, you'll see there's a pin icon here. Now the pin just indicates which element is the hosting element. And this feature is required to ensure compatibility with the IFC opening standard. And what will happen is that one IFC opening will be created and then two SEO, solid element operations, are added, rather than having three identical IFC openings. And I think really what we'd want is just to have one opening rather than place three. The reason why is because we avoid data duplication, and mathematicians don't like data duplication. And also, there's a limitation in that IFC openings can only have one target. So essentially, this current solution allows us to select a single opening and then change its properties or data only once through the settings. Here's its properties and its data, rather than having to do it 2 or 3 times. And I think that's the right approach. If you want to change the hosting element, you can just click a different layer, and you can see this blue line moves. Let's have a look at a polygonal wall and introduce the concept of niche. So here's an opening here on the right hand side, and at the moment it is able to cut through the wall on both sides infinitely. So if the wall became thicker, the opening would remain attached. The next option across allows us to limit on one side, and this allows us to create a niche with a particular depth. It's still attached to the outside of the wall, but we can go further into the wall like so, just by typing an extra 100 mils up here in the offset. And you can access that through the pet palette as well. But what if we wanted to make a channel through this wall? Well, in that case, we would need to fix it on both sides, and then stretch it back, and I can create a little opening in the middle of a wall vertically. Okay, I'm just going to undo a few times, and we'll have a look at this in 3D. We can see there's our 2 openings. They're niches at the moment. And if I select one, we can see there's a cutting body. So let's make this really quite visible. We can click View, on-screen View Options, and you can see the opening cutting bodies, much like the trimming bodies that roofs have. So if, for instance, for some reason, you start seeing these geometries in your model, they're most likely related to the opening bodies. Now, opening bodies can also be rotated and moved around. Let's have a look at how that works. So we're going to click up here on the opening, and you can choose rotate, and you get to choose which plane you want to rotate in. So click and hold the mouse button down, and then release it when I found that node on the edge. And then we just select our handle, and it might be better if I just orbit around a little bit. There we go. Click. And now I can have a nice little reveal in the wall to place some downlights. You can also create openings using multiple, or using a geometry. So I think this is a pretty cool feature, and essentially it just allows us to create openings from any solid element. For example, if you're planning a large building, maybe you've drawn a morph body to simulate where the lift shaft's going to go. So let's have a look at how this might work. So here's my floor plan, and we're just going to go through more of a traditional workflow first. So previously we would have cut a hole in the slab and then had to find the opening symbol in 2D library. Now I can just click with an opening favorite and I get my symbol for the slab penetration. In 3D, we can see my opening here on the floor plan. And if I wanted to attach it to a level above, you can do so just like that. And the symbol will appear on the subsequent levels. Okay, so what if we just wanted to use this morph body to cut all the slabs here? That's also possible. So we'll click on the morph body. And then I'm just going to right click and then choose connect and create openings from selection. Now the new little openings dialog pops up. It's a palette, so we can still work in the model with this open. Okay, and what we want to do is create a lift shaft here. So in the first instance, I actually don't want to merge nearby openings. I want to have a separate opening for each penetration. And if we delete that morph body there, we can see that each one of these openings, and it's really clear from having the opening bodies present, each one of these is separate. Okay, and how about we do the same for the stairwell? So I'll click on the geometry. This time around, I want to just have one opening because my stairs might move, for instance, and we will merge nearby openings. I'll put a little tick mark here. And I just have to specify the distance between openings required for them to be merged. Okay, we're now going to have a look at how this might work in a MEP workflow with some fake geometry here. These are just morph bodies, but what I wanted to demonstrate is what these parts here of the opening palette do. So let's select these, and I've left it to the first setting, which is automatic or default. And what we can do is just add a small offset around the openings, maybe of say 30 mils. Now, one setting which I didn't turn off in the previous view that I should have was the keep original elements. And of course, with MEP stuff, we definitely want to keep the original elements. If I untick this, these ductworks and the pipe will actually be deleted as part of this process. So let's just click create openings. And we can see that Archicad's created a series of openings, and if the pipe is round, we get a round hole. And if the pipe is square, we get a square hole. But round holes might be too expensive, so we can override this. We'll just select our geometries again. This time around, we'll say that the holes have to be square and will have a larger offset as well. Create openings, and that enables us to merge these two and that one. And let's have a look at how they look on floor plan, complete with their symbol. that leads us into the next topic, which is documentation. And we're now going to have a look at a more detailed look at how the documentation works. So as this diagram illustrates, any views that we see from section are always projected. Same with elevation. That's just how Archicad works. But in floor plan, our parts are symbolic. So the symbols actually relate to the GDL, and that means that they are a little bit more intelligent. And in general, there are just two types of symbols used. There's cut and uncut, depending on the height. We can also override this so that they always show as cut, just like with windows in Archicad. It's just important to note that a projection of an opening on floor plan isn't available, but you can just turn the symbol off. So let's have a look at this new view. And if I was to draw a line just across the middle here that symbolizes the floor plan cut plane height, I'll just make that red so everyone can see. We can have a symbolic view, where if something is below the cut line, at the cut line, or above the cut line, it's represented normally. And you can see the openings get dashed if they aren't being cut. Or we can override it so it's always cut, or make them overhead all. It's up to you. The appearance of the symbol and the appearance of the axis line is controlled by model view options as well. And we'll just open up our model view options dialog, and I'll show you that it's controlled here. And let's turn off our opening bodies. And we can see the results. This is the type of symbols that we have available to us. For a cut, and then such symbols for uncut. Again, they're not automatic, so I can select this guy and I can override if I want to, like so. We can also show the opening as being a unified opening or separated. So what I mean by that is if I grab this outer leaf, the unified opening looks like this, and the separated opening doesn't have the orange lines in between. And that is controlled through floor plan and section. Up here at the top, unified or separated. You can also use the contours of cut elements, which is quite nice. Like so. And the opening tool is compatible with renovation. So if we just place a little opening, and I'm going to come back to my favorite here. And just place one opening here. Bring up our renovation palette. This element here is categorized as existing. This element is new. And these skins are also new. For this opening to be present here, I have to add it in, and the symbol will stretch, and the symbol will stretch as well. And we do the same for the other skins. And then what happens if we just want to see the existing? What's going to be demolished? So this opening is classified as new. After demolition, new construction, and so on. The openings can also be scheduled, like I mentioned before. So width, height, opening sill height, header height, total thickness, the shape, and so on. And we can also reveal some of this information in labels, so IDs, for instance. All right, and here's some of the information that we can pull out as well, so they can be dimensioned and labeled and scheduled. Okay, we're now going to talk about a provision for voids workflow, and we're going to be having a look at this case study. So has anyone on this webinar heard about a provision for voids workflow? And I'm going to open that up to the questions. Okay, seems to be a pretty new thing here. So the workflow is aimed at coordinating the geometries which are exchanged between architects, structural engineers, and services engineers. And it might be known as provision for or provision of voids. And generally they're placed where services need to be penetrated. Services need to penetrate structural elements or the core of load-bearing structures. So naturally these points will need to be communicated particularly well. And previously we had to identify where they were, then cut a hole using like a blank opening, and then model it properly. And then place the 2D symbol in our drawing. And that is not quite the most efficient way of doing things, especially when, even in a small building like this on screen, look at all these green openings. That'd be a lot of work to do. So we've got a little bit of an example here. And here's a services system. We've got the structural elements here. And we're just going to select these two provision for void geometries, which in this case are highlighted red. And we're going to make sure that keep original elements is left selected. We don't need an offset. And the ID given to the openings that we are creating can either be inherited from the original piece of geometry, or we can use a tool default, which enables us to find them later, remove them, or update them. So we'll just create openings, and you might not see it here, but just like that, quickly created the openings. And they're documented on the floor plan as well. Up the top here. So we're now having a look at the hidden gems. And the first thing we're going to talk about is performance. We can close the opening palette now. And previously, when we started Archicad, the workflow was like, well, we click, and then we wait a little bit while the program opens, and then it eventually asks us what to open. So we've got the user at the top, the computer at the bottom, and time across this horizontal section here. And the workflow kind of went like this, from computer to user, back to computer. Program asks us something. Maybe it's saying or warning us that the library is missing, or you need to update hot links. And so it wasn't quite streamlined. And it took us a long time to open some files because of this. And this is how we would symbolize it. So there's a bit of a waiting, backwards and forwards, and so on. Now with the startup dialog, the process is a lot faster. So while we actually click to load the program, there's a lot of thinking that goes on in the background. and we'll be presented with this dialog here at the top. And while we wait and choose maybe which projects to open, Archicad is still processing in the background, opening things up. So we get to this dialog a lot faster. This dialog also allows us to see our latest projects. You can hold down the command key or control key and select multiple to open all at once. You can also view your projects graphically, and the 3D view, the plan view will be saved, for instance. So we can activate that on mouse over. And at the top here, there's a little cog, and this allows us to set the default behavior, for instance, when opening legacy projects, older projects. You can always migrate the library. You can also set a default behavior when opening archive projects. So, for instance, now we'll always read elements directly from the archive rather than being prompted. First time you open up the startup dialog, this is what you'll see. And you can access some online tutorials here. And there'll be some demo files that will be made available a little bit later on. And so if you're learning Archicad, you can open up a demo file and see how it's put together. The other really cool thing is that we won't be prompted with all these warning signs anymore. They'll be consolidated and we can review them from the Action Center, which is this little guy here. If your file has any problems, you get a little tab. If you close that tab, you can always reopen it, File Info, and then Action Center. And it just allows us to kind of go through and see what, if any, are the problems. Now, sometimes if you've got lots of tabs open, it's quite hard to remember which tab you want to open. Open next. For instance, you might have multiple sections, or a section at elevation, or a couple of details. And now we get tab previews across the top, which is kind of nice. And they just store the last view that was represented there. Now, if you don't like that, you can also disable it by ticking or unticking show preview in tab bar. But I think this is a pretty cool little thing. You can also see all tabs that are open using this expose button here, and then switch between them. So let's say I want to come back to that view. I think rebuild what's changed is going to be a bit of a game changer for us, because now Archicad just identifies what's changed in your building or in your design and updates that. It doesn't have to rebuild the entire screen. This is particularly nice when working on quite large files or files with heavy line work. And I've got a bit of a video to actually demonstrate this. So we'll start from about here. Just click play and we'll see that we've got this text, and this is a map of London behind us. And we're just going to turn off that AC22 text. Now, the CPU has to do some processing, and we'll see the floor plan kind of regenerate, and that's indicated by these little darker lines that are coming up as the CPU goes and does its little tiling thing. And after a couple of seconds, the text has disappeared. Let's do the same in Archicad 23. And if I turn off annotation, in a couple of seconds, it's gone. Turn it back on, and it's there. We also have a new feature for layouts called Update to Frame. And now Archicad will store only what's visible here. And so in that previous video, we saw the map of London was quite large. And in Archicad 22, Archicad would have stored the entire drawing 3 times in this instance. And if there's a change, it would have had to update that entire drawing 3 times to do this. There's also another feature called crop to frame, and that means that Archicad's stored only what's visible. So if you want to kind of pull the drawing out and see a little bit more, you just click on the edge, pull it out to where you need to, and then uncrop drawings or update to frame. Update to frame would keep the frame present. Uncrop drawings just gets rid of this whole crop to frame part here. So again, we'll just come back to the video to explain that a little bit more clearly. So we've pulled our drawing out, and now to actually get the drawing in this space here, we have to click Update to Frame. And I think this will help when we've got quite detailed drawings, and Archicad is slowing down a little bit when we zoom and pan through layouts. Naturally though, if you don't like this, you can uncrop drawings. So clicking that removes the feature. But let's have a quick look at how much faster things are now because of these two changes. So we're going to refresh Archicad 22 first. We're just going to update these drawings. You can see Archicad 22 is starting to update. And we're doing the same in 23. Okay, 23 is already up to the second drawing. 22 is still doing the first. 23 is now up to the third drawing. 22 is still doing the first. And we're done. And we can get back to work. 23 is still going. And we're just fast forwarding the video a little bit. And we're done. So you can see that I think this is quite a remarkable change. There's also a few library enhancements available now. In the curtain wall tool, there's a great louver panel. Has some pretty interesting settings. I think what I like about this is that your windows can be any shape. So if I click on this curtain wall and click Edit, and then I can click on this window, let's change this to the louver panel, and we can change a few settings about it. So for example, we can change the profile of the louvers to a Z, an L, or you can even model your own using complex profile tool. And you can space them out a little bit more, let's say 100 mils between. You can rotate them around. But one of the remarkable things about this is that if we start to draw frames here, you can get all types of crazy looking geometry. So it's really, really flexible, and it now operates much like the curtain wall window tool. There's a lot of detail that can be obtained in the floor plan as well. You can see that here, and it obviously responds to model view options. There's also a new elevator library part, which again responds to model view options. So we can show opening only or show the entire door. There's some more door options as well. You know, this telescopic door. We can hide openings altogether. The tool itself is using building materials, which is an improvement over previous versions. And I think because we're running out of time, I might just speed this up a little bit. So there's just a better interface for door display settings. You can display opening lines and improved core-only display, show on stories, cut pens introduced to better identify what is structural and what is just geometry, like the doors, and there's model view options on settings. You can move the openings about in 3D or in section just by clicking on them and dragging them up and down. So this is really useful if you've got split levels. There's a couple of improvements around the ramp tool or ramp object. Slope gradient data can be displayed in multiple formats now, so gradients, percentages, or degrees, and the slopes can be defined for ramp transitions at the bottom or the top. Here's a couple of ramps, and in plan, you can see that we've got percentages, degrees, and so on. From an informational standpoint, building material properties are now available, and these are great for scheduling criteria. You can access the fields in component schedules or through GDL element labels, and any properties here are considered metadata when exported to IFC. Properties and schedules. The building material properties are available just down the bottom here. On a productivity standpoint, I think there's quite a few perfectionists out there that will love this one. Our label tool has been enhanced so that if we just scroll across here in the info bar, we can attach the label to the box like it is now, or to the top line, or to the bottom line. If I just move back to the top line, I can adjust this to the top of the top line, the middle of the top line, or the bottom of the top line. And you can also extend it through to be underlined. So there's quite a lot of flexibility and a lot more ways that we can show our labels. And again, that's one of the things that have been on the wish list for a little while. Floor slabs can also be represented as connected. Now in floor plan, when you've got two slabs side by side sharing the same top surface material, they have to be at the same height though. This is something that is controlled through model view options again, down here, and we can have an option to eliminate show lines or use hidden lines. So let's have a look at how that works quickly. Here's our two slabs, and I'm going to use hidden lines. And the hidden line is one here. So if I make that hidden line, maybe installation, that's what I get. Not that you'd do that. Interactive schedules have been improved as well. I think this is actually quite nice if you've got long schedules. The zoom factor by default is 25%. 20% has become 25%. And they've introduced 75% and 125%. And one of the best things for a long listed schedules is that you can freeze the schedule header. So as I scroll down, the header remains there. Missing attributes are now easier to find. If you have any missing attributes, you can click Show Details in Browser now, and you can see in this particular file 4 wall elements with those IDs had some missing attributes, tool defaults and favorites. So that just helps us find instances where like a wall has been placed and perhaps it's missing or it's using a line type which is missing. The attribute itself has been deleted, and maybe the surface has been deleted, or the fill that it's using has been deleted. So it just helps us identify any drafting issues quickly that are being caused by missing attributes. If a surface is missing from a library, we can identify in the attribute manager. The little JPEG indicator will be red. And you can choose to browse for a new texture or remove the texture altogether. From a visualization standpoint, there's a brand new scene render engine, R20, and what this offers us is enhanced progressive physical rendering for quicker and cleaner rendering results, using a bunch of new things The differences are noticeable. And there's also a renewed built-in surface catalog. And I think this is really, this goes a long way to helping us produce better renders. We now have more improved reflections, and we're using parallax offsets, so the rendering is faster. And the textures are a lot larger, and they're using crisper, cleaner images. And in general, the parameters are a little bit more simplified. Like I mentioned before, with our surfaces, you could find your old surface, click New, replace settings from Catalog, find the Archicad 23 library, and find the surface that you want to replace with. We've written a tip and trick on how to actually construct something like an Excel document that will automatically map things. So I'll just quickly show you how that works. Over here in this Archicad file, this is Archicad 23. Let's see the opening tool. I've opened an Archicad 22 file, and we're just going to quickly open up the library manager. Okay, this file has been migrated, but the migration library contains the old surfaces, and I don't like that. Now we've got a new feature in this work environment that I'm using, and the tip and trick I wrote shows you how to get this command in. It's called redefine all surfaces from catalog. And we've written a spreadsheet that will enable you to create a configuration file. And what the spreadsheet does is it will help you create this CSV file where you start with your surface as it stands, the surface that you want to use, and the surface name that you want to have after the fact, and they're separated by semicolons. Again, the tip and trick is there, it spells it out. Quite useful. And if you're using just the standard Aussie template surfaces in this example, then it'll work fine. And we'll have a look at getting one up there ASAP for New Zealand as well. So we're going to browse for the config file here. The config file I created, I just showed you, it was on my desktop. Here's the surface migration table. And just like that, all my surfaces have been remapped. Okay, coming back to our presentation, this is an example of some of the renders that we can create. There we go. I think that the reflections are really quite nice. For software keys, there's integrated software key activation. So download if you've got your Graphisoft ID and it's linked to a software key. You can just sign into Archicad, and if there's a software key available in your company pool, Archicad will download it automatically. And you can upload your software key right inside Archicad, so you don't have to open up the license manager tool. Now, if you also rename any pen sets, I think we talked about this in the pen webinar, or any model view options or any layer combinations, in previous versions of Archicad, they would be listed as missing. Now, that doesn't happen. It just updates to whatever you change it to. When you're publishing, you can right-click on the element here and click Show in Finder, and it will show where you published to. So you can open up the document automatically. It's kind of nice. One thing you might have noticed as I was playing around with the labels is that in Archicad 23, the little pull-out menus for some of the info bar options have been extended, so you don't have to do that long click anymore. Just see the options here. And it's the same for zones. And lastly, I think this one I really like because it was always a little bit frustrating not to see the line here when two bodies of complex profiles met. Now in Archicad 23, we have that line. Again, apologies for going over a little bit more time than I thought. I'd like to say thank you and I'll have a look at some of the questions now.